been a week.
How do the Napoleonic Wars affect Regency romances? How does the Civil Rights Movement affect your cyberpunk dystopia? How does the nonfiction we consume from history, sociology, and science affect the creation of our fiction? What other areas of nonfiction can inform our fiction? Today, our panelists discuss why the cross-pollination between fiction and nonfiction matters. In the midst of our discussion, we will turn to C.L. Cannon, who has some books you might like if you're a fan of Trust of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. We will then download our information into your brain with this week's shows on our Go Indie Minute. Then put on your boots, because flip-flops won't cut it, as we set up the prompts for J.D. Estrada's March of the Writers. Last, but certainly not least, our panelists share their writing in the epilogue. So open up that book of poisons and turn on the Space Channel. It's time for another fact-filled episode of This Week in Indies with your host, S.M. Hillman. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to This Week in Indies. I'm your host, S.M. Hillman. Some of your earliest reading falls into, not into the realm of fable, but comes from real life and the interpretation of fact, which we call nonfiction. Science, history, philosophy, and religious texts provide a framework for our social interactions. And today, the panelists, who we will introduce, we'll discuss letting that into fiction. See, I almost got it perfect that time. Not quite. Anyway, let's start by meeting our panelists. Start with A.F. Stewart.
Hi, I'm A.F. Stewart, Nita Stewart. I use a lot of nonfiction in my fiction because I write a lot of historical fiction. And so there's a lot of research involved, but also I've used nonfiction as inspiration for some of my books as well.
Awesome. Excellent. Thank you for being here with us today. Next up, Ben.
Hi, folks. Ben Schenkman, urban fantasy author and audiobook narrator. And I also use a lot of nonfiction in my work because I do a lot of magical realism, which is usually grounded in world religion. And most specifically, my next book coming out was inspired by the very nonfiction of the recent last couple of years. So yeah, happy to talk about this topic.
Awesome. Excellent. Thanks for being here. Paige L. Christie.
Folks, I'm Paige L. Christie, and I write epic fantasy, feminine fantasy, IP for Valdemar, contemporary fantasy, and I'm just starting to dabble in horror based on real life at the moment. So yeah, I use all kinds of aspects of nonfiction in my work, from mythology studies to maps and cultural reference books from different regions of the world to try to make things as depth-filled as possible.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being here today. Brad?
Hey, I'm Brad Anderson. I also use a lot of I wouldn't be here, I guess, if I didn't use nonfiction in my fiction. I'm a science fiction author. I use a lot of nonfiction, sometimes for just some scientific realism, as well as I've also used it for creating religions. I've also used it for history. You don't think of sci-fi as having a history, but the future society has a history of its own. So how do you fill that out? And nothing better than looking at let's look at what really happened to figure that stuff out.
Right. Awesome. Thank you for being here today. Juliet?
Yeah, so I definitely use some fiction in my nonfiction. I definitely started as a nonfiction writer and then decided to start to weave in fiction because I wanted to reach a broader audience. And I found like when I wrote nonfiction, I got the audience that was already going to read my stuff. When I wrote fiction, I got a broader audience and I could take those same subject matter. I read a lot of contemporary, so same subject matter, and make it something people maybe would read that wouldn't pick up my nonfiction.
Awesome. Excellent. Thank you so much. I appreciate everybody being here. Let's grab a few early comments. Vanessa saying hello. Our folks in the comments, definitely pay attention to that. And Jenna, love this topic. Yep, thank you, Jenna. And then Joe saying hello. All right, Anita, I think let's start with you. Tell us, you write historical fiction, so obviously there's some degree of nonfiction when you're creating your stories. Can you tell us a little bit how your process works for that, and the question to everybody will be, what nonfiction do you decide to put into your stories?
Well, that would be decided primarily by what the setting is and what era I'm basing my books in. If I'm writing historical fantasy or historical horror, I use the Victorian era a lot. And this particular book is good. What Jane Austen, and Charles Dickens knew for anything in the 19th century. There's a lot of nice tidbits in that. And books like that, you need to know the society you're writing in before you start writing. Because you don't want to throw in things that weren't invented yet, for instance, unless you're writing maybe steampunk, in which case you can fudge the history a little bit. But you still have to base it primarily in the era you're writing in, so you need to know what was available. For instance, I was writing a flashback theme for my Camelot Immortals series, and I was talking about her sleeping, and I'm going, well, did they have beds back then? How did they sleep? So I had to go and do my research on that and find some nonfiction to figure out exactly what kind of a setup they'd have just to write one scene. So historically speaking, that's what you're doing all the time. You're researching your setting and your mannerisms and your society through nonfiction.
Other than the book that you showed, is there a particular work that inspired your writing, some nonfiction that inspired your fiction?
I have had a couple of nonfictions like this one, The Butchering Art, which is history of autopsies and medicine in the Victorian era. There was actually a piece, I was reading that, and there was a piece saying how they had public dissections in as far back as the Renaissance, and I'm currently writing a Renaissance book set in Venice, and I'm going, ooh, that would make a good scene in the second book, because the second book has a doctor as one of the characters. So that inspired that particular scene that's actually in the book. So yeah. So when you're reading things for just research purposes, you get little tidbits that inspire scenes to be put in your books.
Awesome. Excellent. Ben?
Yeah, I have to take this to a slightly different area, though I have to say something potentially funny first, is that I imagined Anita turning the romance world on its head by turning the one bed trope into a no beds trope, because that just wouldn't have been allowed then. But I write contemporary fantasy or urban fantasy specifically. So my use of nonfiction, while often maybe historically based, it's not the same as needing to get things right from a setting perspective. I'll say my latest published book, Let Sleeping Gods Lie, is from the perspective of a community college professor who effectively teaches history 101. And specifically history with a module that's in New England. And then I use some very real examples of wars and conflicts between the colonizers and the indigenous peoples of the area. And I'll say I think it was King Philip's War specifically, to highlight some of the messages that I was trying to portray in the themes of the book. So sometimes nonfiction that I use is meant to ground things in reality as far as theming and information. Also just to give the scenes some more weight to them. But then on the magic side, I tend to link a lot of my magic systems with world religion. So specifically, my book that's coming out next, My Brother's Keeper, is very Jewish. I am Jewish. And there's a lot of direct inspiration from religious texts like the Talmud, where, and not just that, but also Jewish religious and cultural practice, sitting Shiva, or last time I was here, I read a sample that talked about the burial practices. So yeah, I use a lot of nonfiction to ground my urban fantasy closer to reality, to kind of give it a little bit more of a realistic feel.
I had a question about that that you read. You mentioned your brother or the brother's last mitzvah. Is mitzvah like a term that means for like life event or something like that? It seems like it comes up in different places in Jewish language and religion.
Yeah, a mitzvah is just like a good deed. So,
Okay.
If I'll add some more Yiddish, like if you want to be a mensch, which is like a good guy, then you want to do mitzvahs, which is good deeds.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you for educating me. I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
Paige?
Oh, you can't get away from nonfiction in my fiction. And like when I was building the world for my series, The Legacies of Arnon, I didn't want to make the mistake that fantasy authors make in world building, like the landscape, where the mountains go this way, but there's no reason they would, and the rivers are here. I wanted to create a realistic map of the world, and so I actually went out and looked at Earth and a globe, and I zoomed in on particular areas of land masses until I found one that was the world I wanted to build, and then I incorporated that. I pulled that out and incorporated it as a map for my story. And if anybody can guess which chunk of land that is, I'll send you a free book. So that's part of it. And then within the story, there are cultural references to dance and music, and I was a Middle Eastern dancer for many years. And so this one, which is I trade like any other female singers and dancers in Egypt. Some historical reference from this book actually shows up in the stories. And also, I'm a big fan of just maps in general. Like this just happens to be one I have handy. As far as landscape trails, how rivers lie, what topography looks like. Landscape is big for me in my stories. Landscape is a character, and so I delve very deeply into this kind of thing. But I think too that nonfiction becomes a cultural reference as well as a factual reference. Like there are aspects of culture, like the story I'm going to possibly read a little clip from in a little bit has the lead character in that. The story is based around his experience of memory, and he remembers a past from a culture that no longer exists. And I specifically pulled from a culture that technically still does exist, but is fading. And I had to go research things about their language and culture and histories. And even in just small paragraphs, I never name who it is, but just having that depth is important. Like trees are important in that story. I'm a big tree person. There's this is one I use a lot. The forest in folklore and mythology. But the language of the culture I was basing things off of, they don't have a word for tree. They only name trees by species. They don't have a word for trees as a whole or tree. I had to go back, and everywhere I'd put in the word tree, I had to pull it out and put the species of tree. So it can change your story in interesting ways when you get into nonfiction and tie it to culture and language.
Awesome. Excellent. Thank you. And I think I probably know, but I won't spoil it for everybody with land mass page use. But anyway.
Yeah, we could talk later.
Yeah, Brad.
Hey, fantasy authors love their maps, don't they? It's one of the joys of reading fantasy, I always find. So for me, I'm a science fiction author. So I use nonfiction. I'd say that there's probably two categories of things that I use my nonfiction for. One is for world building, and one is for character building. So with science, one of the things with science fiction is you have to create a whole world. And oftentimes, like, there's events going on in the world, And so, how do you make those events believable? What do those events look like? Again, I sort of lean a lot on nonfiction. It could be history, it could be just the news. And then the other thing that I think sometimes you don't think about is, if there's an event going on in the world, there is a historical precedence that led up to that event. And so you often don't think of science fiction authors having to create history, but they do. So there's this future situation in a society, and then that society has a historical antecedent that led to that situation. And filling that out kind of creates, I think, depth in world building. And so I rely a lot on nonfiction. I do a lot of history of specific time periods or specific events that I need to help build out that world building aspect. The other aspect I find is with characters, and probably two ways I use nonfiction with characters. So in my most recent book, Ashme's Song, one of the main characters has a genetic defect, and it's a major part of his character, or who he is. So a lot of I was reading medical textbooks on this. Like I read a medical textbook on this, and as well as other literature on that. Just just what's that? How does this manifest? How does it affect people? Just to sort of get that depth. And then the other way that I use nonfiction to see how it affects character building is, again, there's events happening. One of the things I really enjoy, I think, with things like history is, especially if you can get a history where there's a lot of reliance on the experience of people who actually lived through the event. What were they thinking? How do they feel about things? I think oftentimes, sort of pulling from that helps sort of build out the characters that I'm writing about and the experiences that they're having in this future world. So yeah, that's sort of the two main thrusts of how I probably, for every story I write, there's probably like about 5 or 8 different nonfiction books or things or resources that I've relied on to create it. So there we go.
So, fellow science fiction writer, because there's not a lot of us around. Do you have a particular science theory or science background or anything like that you rely on?
Yeah, so I was originally in my early on in my career, I was a science guy. My background is more in the biotechnology side of things rather than the physics and astrophysics side of things. So I do actually rely on that. And so yeah, like my main character who has this genetic disease, like my background, like I can read a medical textbook and make sense of it. My first book, Duotero, focused a lot on sort of alien ecology and alien biochemistry, and yeah. So my background, my original background was in biochemistry and medical science. So I do lean a lot on that as well.
Awesome, excellent. Thank you for sharing that, Juliet.
Yeah, I think that most of my stories come from a nonfiction, reality that I've heard. So whether it was a news article or something going on in the world, and so that will often inspire a story idea, which kind of naturally takes it into that. It's easier to kind of find that information because it exists. Whether or not, I write sci-fi, I write horror, they all tend to have something in real life that has inspired them to begin the story. I'm a huge research nerd. I love it, like, to a fault. So like that's part of the problem is like once I start digging in. So for example, with my book, Prick of the Needle, it gets into wildland firefighting, which, some about, and it was inspired by an article I saw about how they use prisoners for wildland firefighting, at really kind of the detriment to the prisoners and the benefit to the state. And so like, I wanted to write a story basically from the point of view of a wildland firefighter. But that was a lot of research because I wanted to make sure it was accurate, because I think we've all been in a situation where we're watching a movie or reading a book and they take a situation that we're familiar with and they portray it inaccurately. And we go, that's not possible, So I think that's a big part of it, is when we're presenting fiction, but with nonfiction, we still really want to stick to the truth so that the reader is invested in that and can believe in it. And so when I was writing that book, I just read so much on wildland firefighting. I watched YouTube videos in the Paradise Fire in California and just like how fire can spread. And every little detail. So much so that I actually had a review that said that they thought I was a wildland firefighter who wanted to write about it. Nope, I've never fought a fire.
And that's a subject we're going to get back to here in a second. But I think it's interesting that when you're looking at fact or nonfiction, I think is probably the best word. It's, how do we decide which nonfiction is the nonfiction that we want to put into our book or to our story, right? I think like a good example would be if you were to rely on The Lost Cause as a history of the Civil War, there'd be some wild inaccuracies and some characters would be portrayed inaccurately and some better and some worse than they actually were. That's just an example from our own history too. But I like the fact that you mentioned, how do you, and actually this is going to lead us off to our next question here in a second, but how do you verify which nonfiction to use, or how do you go through that process?
Yeah, I actually, when I was in college and I was taking an English class, and I remember we were having to write an article, a nonfiction article, and I remember talking to the teacher because I read this article and she gave me 100 on it, but she said, I just want to point out something. She said, you have things in here that are interesting, but they're not pertinent. Like they could have been left out because it didn't really change the scope of your article. And that's really what I think about when I'm doing research is like, oh, that's fascinating. But is it pertinent to the story? Because ultimately we're still telling a story. We're not writing a nonfiction article. We're not, trying to expose one specific thing. So I think it has to be pertinent. It has to help move that story along.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. It makes sense to me. Absolutely. And sometimes, giving a different version of the nonfiction might make the story more interesting too, or lead something in that regard. Grab a couple comments here real quick. Vanessa is excited for the topic. So many amazing books from actual nonfiction. Yeah, absolutely. Joe knows Paige is map seeker too, but because she told him already. Yep. Brad wins for suffering most of his art by reading a medical textbook. There we go. True. Hey, I've read physics textbooks for mine. Pretty much everything in Handmaid's Tale was from real history. Real life is often way more scary than fiction, which is why it's good to read history and other nonfiction. Yes, for sure. So, Brad, I'll throw the same question at you that Juliet answered for us. Is how do you go through? What do you choose? How do you verify? What process do you use for making sure your nonfiction is the nonfiction that you're looking for?
I know. Fantastic question. Yeah. So one of the things that I started to do that I really like, and it's probably something that general human beings should do. So with history, they always say that, the victors write the history books and things like that. And I mean, that's very true. So how do you get authenticity into a world building element that you're doing? And oftentimes, if you look with a lot of things, you can find history written by multiple perspectives. You can find a lot of history written by the victors, but if you look hard, sometimes you can find some history written by or representing the people that weren't the victors. And so oftentimes I look for that. I look for that, and then I try to build that into the story, like that nuance into the story, right? Because nobody ever thinks they're the villain, right? No side ever thinks they're the villain, but they perceive things, they read things, they look at events through their lens, and then they interpret it through their lens. And hey, this is what it means. And so, yeah, oftentimes I will try to look at these events from multiple different perspectives. Those, the victors and the people that weren't the victors, and the people that were just like schmoes on the street, just trying to get through their days and stuff like that. And I find doing that can add a lot of nuance, and that adds a lot of, what is the right thing to do kind of situations in your stories. So that's one of the things, what do I do to make sure that it's the right nonfiction is to try to find multiple perspectives on it. As Juliet also said, sometimes not everything's the most important thing. What's important, honestly, it's what's needed for the story. So you don't necessarily, you're like, what do forks look like in this time period and whatever else, right? You don't necessarily need to get down into the weeds like that. You just sort of need the broad strokes. And I'm kind of lucky, or I think science fiction people are kind of lucky, because we don't have to be historically accurate. I can just like hand wave away. Like, this isn't real life. This is a world I made up, and it's not historically accurate, but it's historically accurate for the story that I'm writing, for the future society. So sometimes you can get away from that. Let's say science fiction authors have that out. Like, I'm not actually trying to write history. I'm just using this as inspiration for this future world that I'm envisioning there. So I think science fiction and probably fantasy. Well, science fiction gets a little bit of an out. We get, I think science fiction authors get, there's always the science people in the audience who might start to quibble about some of your scientific, methodologies about what's known or what isn't known. But at some point when you're, at some point we're writing a story, and some things will just, some things just need to exist for this story to exist, and just, please suspend your disbelief and run with me with it.
Absolutely. Although when we get to A.F. Stewart, we'll ask about how the need to know accurate forks. Paige?
Repeat the question for me, Sean. I'm so interested in people's answers that I've lost the thread.
How do you verify the nonfiction that you're using? How do you sift through the various pieces of nonfiction to find the ones that are accurate or the ones that serve you best?
Well, first I have to figure out what the story's about and what interests me about the story. And then I try to find the pieces that are missing. Like, I'm big about mythology and, again, culture. There's a fabulous, speaking of history written by not necessarily the victors, there's a fabulous YouTube channel called Craigenford, and he is building a worldwide international database of mythology to trace the history of original stories across the entire world. Like, what was the first story about dragons? What was the first story about a sun god? What was the first story about? And he's building this database based on research and input from other researchers all over the world. And if I've got a question about some piece of cultural mythology, I go straight there, because he's been working at this for years. He's a credentialed professor. He's got lots and lots of information from lots and lots of sources all over the world. And so finding something that I trust like that. And then I go pre-internet, quite frankly. Used bookstores are your friend. This is one of my favorites. I found this for like $4 at a used bookstore. It doesn't even have the dust jacket. This is Between Flesh and Steel, A History of Military Medicine from the Middle Ages to the War in Afghanistan. And I just was browsing the used bookstore in the history section, and this book is old enough that I know that it's probably been researched on some level before somebody just pulled up Wikipedia and guessed. So paper resources, university libraries, they'll often let you in the research stacks if you're sweet enough to them and bring them cookies. So it's figuring out what your story is about, what you need to learn to make the story work, and then figuring out how much digging you need to do. But I'm a big go to the paper books fan, or go to credentialed academic sources, or your own lived experience in a field, or find somebody who has lived experience in the field. When Juliet was talking, I went to high school with a fellow who is one of the top wildfire captains in the nation. And I was thinking about, if I ever need to do that, I'd just call Peter. So who do you know? And what do they know? Yeah.
Awesome. Excellent. Thank you. Ben?
Yeah, I think it comes down to a lot of whether you're talking about inspiration or representation. So if you are inspired by nonfiction, I think the bar that you set for yourself for what is an appropriate source or how much research is necessary is going to be lower than if you're talking about trying to actually represent something as accurately as possible. So, for example, I have a raccoon in one of my books that is inspired by Algonquin mythology, and there's a cute tale about how raccoon got his stripes. So that's inspiration. But then if you're talking about trying to represent a living culture, then you're talking about representation. And so that gets into wanting to talk to primary sources, which includes people with the lived experience that you're looking to represent. So yeah, it's really a combination of both. In my latest book, again, going back to Jewish scripture, I did a lot of my research by looking for information that led to primary sources and quotes within the actual the books that I was referring to. So quotes out of the Talmud, words in the Torah, and then looking at people's interpretations of them, but nonetheless wanting to make sure that I'm staying at least as true to the source material as I'm looking to represent. So yeah, I think inspiration versus representation is an important question when it comes down to it. But I really do like the answer of and will tack on my support for go to primary sources whenever possible to get the real deal.
Mm-hmm.
And so and I think this is a little bit relevant to what you're saying too, is, none of us speak ancient Greek, right? So, some of the translations of various texts come down to various different languages that people don't speak anymore. How do you approach the idea that an interpretation might change based on a better understanding of the language in the future, or do you not just worry about that?
It depends, actually. Entertainingly enough, I think one of the passages I was thinking about reading today discusses that from my book, because if one of the very common quotes out of the Bible, which actually I believe comes from the Old Testament, is the whole thou shalt not suffer a witch to live business, and that's usually mentioned as a mistranslation. And if you go back to the OG scripture, it actually translates differently depending on which translator you're talking about. So yeah, it depends on what you're trying to do with it. If it's not something that you're worried about people coming for you, then you can use whichever translation makes the most sense. But if there's any amount of sensitivity required for what it is that you're going to be talking about, then yeah, you probably want to look into which translation is considered to be the most correct from a linguistic and historical perspective.
Awesome. Thank you. Anita, how important is it to have the right fork in historical fiction?
Yeah, if you're basing anything in history, you better get your facts right. They will come for you. And if you're doing like a historically based, like most of mine are historical fantasy, so there's fantasy elements thrown into the history. But for the history, I never rely on one source. It's always multiple books, multiple historical societies. That's an excellent, or historical archives. Those are excellent sources because they're all researched meticulously. But another good source is archaeology. Because they're always finding new stuff when they're digging up these places, and the history is changing from these finds. So archaeological sources and archaeological sites are an excellent way to go and look up stuff, especially for the more ancient things, like if you're doing some Roman based book or something like that. So that's another thing. But if you're writing fantasy that's based on history, there's a lot of leeway there, because you can change things, because it's a fantasy world. It doesn't have to, it may be based sort of like if you're doing a medieval style world, it's based on medieval real life, but you can change things. You don't have to keep it the same. So there's a lot of leeway when you're writing fantasy. And if you're writing alternate history, the same sort of leeway is there. You have to have some historic reality. But if you're writing steampunk, say, because I write that a lot too, I mean, you're giving these people airships that never existed in the 19th century. You're giving them contraptions and machines and all sorts of things that never existed in real life. I mean, it has to be based on the technology of the time. And you can fudge this and fudge this a little bit, because, if you're doing a alternate history, then some things could have been sped up a little bit. Discoveries that maybe say were in the 20th century, you can move it to the later half of the 19th century and things like that. So there's a lot of leeway when you're writing fantasy, but if you're writing strict history-based something, even if there's fantasy involved in it, you do have to ground yourself in historic facts, and you really need more than one source to make sure, because there's a lot of misconceptions out there. Like, for instance, take the witches that Ben mentioned. I mean, most people, if you mention the witch trials, they think, oh, they burned the witches, right? Except they didn't. Witches were not, on the whole, burned at the stake. They were hung. Their bodies were burned afterwards in a lot of cases, but there was only a couple of European countries that actually burned witches at the stake at all, with being Germany and France being two that I know of. So, yeah, there are a lot of misconceptions out there that you have to be careful about.
Yep, absolutely. All right. Okay, so with that in mind, let's take a look. Take a look at some of the comments. Based a lot of my first novel nonfiction account of LAPD homicide. Then I reached out to the author of the book, is publisher and the author, and the author connected me to a source of who based the book on. It spent 4 days with the man on a ride along the precinct, and it changed everything about my book, procedural-wise and authentication-wise. Yep, absolutely. That's so cool. It is cool. Joe is a big proponent of follow the source, right from the source. Yep. If you do, and if you can, then it's not everything that can be like that until we get a time machine. That is, yeah, for sure. Many witches died from the witch tests, thereby exonerating themselves. But Dad, yeah, that is true. And Ben lives near Salem. There have been multiple times no practicing witches were killed during the Salem witch trials either. Gotcha. Awesome. Things that you don't know that you think you do know. So thank you all for mentioning that. All right. So what I know, see what I did there, is that it's time for CL Canon and Indie Connection.
Hey guys, CL Canon here from Fiction Atlas Press, bringing you another Indie Connection. And today I'd like to tell you about some indie books that you might enjoy if you're a fan of Brandon Sanderson's Trust of the Emerald Sea. The first book I have for you is called Wild Home by Amy Sanderson. Asha of Rill doesn't like complications. She prefers her work as a green warden to be as simple as possible, tracking dangerous creatures, clearing poisonous plants, and patrolling the forest around her village home. Anything to spend as much time in the woods as possible, with no one to talk to besides her beloved shadow cat. What she doesn't want is to be sent after a human man who's gone missing, and in the deepest, most mysterious part of the woods, where wardens rarely tread. Venturing into those shadowed halls risks angering the goddess Asha serves, but letting a human invade Hirwain's domain is even worse. There are secrets waiting amongst the trees, strange creatures, marauding visitors, entire villages that shouldn't be there. If Asha is going to restore the sanctity of the woods, she'll have to negotiate an entirely new world, making peace with her own calling as a warden, and wrangle one irritating human who seems determined to get under her skin. The second book I have for you is called The Quill and the Vial by Bree Moore. I've actually read this one, and it is amazing. Highly recommend. Here's the synopsis. Plants lie, and JC can hear them. For 7 years, a deadly plague has threatened the realm. JC has survived by using her plant magic to make and sell remedies, but most of her funds are sucked dry by a corrupt debt collector and the impossible debt she owes the realm. When the debt collector threatens JC with prison unless she'll marry him, she flees into the woods. There she runs into a nameless baron who agrees to pay her debt if she'll help him find the last of the seers who remembers the prophecy of the Plague King. Together they'll face warrior monks, carnivorous reindeer, and their own dark paths as they journey to find a cure before the Plague King rises to wipe out the realm. JC failed the world once. Can she prevent it from happening again? The next book I have for you is called The Girl from the Stars by R.A.M. Navoa. The notorious elvish pirate Captain Grayscales is the most wanted criminal in the entire world. After stealing the royal family's treasure, a bounty has been placed on her head for 20,000 gold pieces. This bounty falls into the lap of Salem Morgan, a young half-elf whose life was filled with more questions than answers regarding her elvish bloodline. Believing this criminal might have answers, Salem sets off to collect this bounty with her best friend, a stranger with a sweet tooth, and a banjo-playing possum. They set out on this adventure full of twists and turns, unexpected alliances and betrayal, even visions of the end of the world. What should have been a straightforward job has our heroes stumble upon a darker, more sinister plot. And the last book I have for you is called Sailing with the Storm Sorcerer by R.S.S. Rodriguez. Sometimes the world doesn't need a hero. It needs a caretaker. Despite being called the Cloudmaker, Nuvum's rain spells almost never work. He lives quietly on a garden raft along the Whisperbend River, helping where he can and trying not to believe the whispers that say he simply isn't very good at magic. Then the rain begins. After Nuvem uncovers an ancient relic in the marshlands, the river rises. Strange winged watchers take to the skies, and secrets buried beneath the bog begin to stir. The people of Silverfern Hollow adapt with cheer and warmth, but something old has awakened, and it seems to be following him. Why does the rain answer Nuvem now, when it never did before? Why do the spirits of the river watch his every step? And why do forgotten voices call him Keeper? At his side are Ludovic, a merchant and scholar who sees worth where Nuvem sees only doubt, and Andy, his sharp-tongued axolotl familiar. Together they set out into the marshlands in search of answers. There, among mushroom circles and lost villages caught between moments, he understands that magic does not always come from power. Sometimes it comes from care. This is a story about being chosen not for strength, but for kindness. About found family, slow rainy days at home, and a love that finds you perfect just the way you are. About learning to trust the quiet work of tending, listening, and letting things unfold.
Okay, that's all for me this week. I'll see you next week on the Indie Connection. Bye.
Thank you, C.L. Cannon, for sharing those books with us. A.L. Mangle, hello, everyone. Coming a little bit late. Happy Sunday. Happy Sunday to you, too. And The Girl from the Stars cover took my breath away. Yeah, that was a pretty good cover, I have to admit. All right, so I'm going to throw this out to everyone. Is there, in all your research and the various things, something that really, I know, surprised you, overturned something that you thought you knew that was factual, just really like a nonfiction fact that you found to be like sort of took your worldview, maybe changed your worldview a little bit?
Sorry, I don't mean to bounce so hard, but like I have such a fun fact about New Haven, Connecticut that came up in one of my other books. So in Let Sleeping Gods Lie, and all my books, so New Haven has this place in it called the New Haven Green. It's like a public space in the middle of the city that is, it's effectively 2 square blocks with a park. There's a couple churches. And I learned doing my research, because it's a relevant plot point in the book. There's a specific reason for the size of the park, for why it was designed that way. And it is designed specifically to allow for the population of New Haven at the time. I believe it was, and I'm going to quote this wrong, but it's effectively related to the Rapture, in that it was designed specifically to be the size so that everyone could stand on the green to be raptured away.
It's interesting. That's pretty. Yeah, creating civic layout due to religious thoughts. That's pretty cool. Awesome.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
I actually came across an interesting fact when I was researching for Venice. I assumed when I went into it that the Venice government was like every other city-state in Italy at the time, ruled by whatever nobility was in charge. But I was completely wrong about that. It was actually run far more like the Roman Republic in the old days, with governing bodies of committees and councils, and the Doge was more of a figurehead than an actual ruler in that city. And also that I found out that the Venetian nuns were a secret powerhouse that controlled the politics in that city for a long time, which was very surprising.
Yeah, for sure, absolutely. Brad, Paige, Juliet.
Sure. Yeah. So this was many years ago now. So I'm from Canada, and Canada is going through a reconciliation, or trying to go through a reconciliation process with First Nations, with the First Nations people here. So many years ago. So when I grew up, like a lot of this history of the relationship between the Settler Society and the First Nations group wasn't taught in schools. Like, I'm a fairly educated guy. I have got a lot of degrees, and I made it through all my education without really learning anything about that aspect of our history at all. And so I was doing research for a book I was writing, and I was looking. There's in the world that I was envisioning, there was sort of a group that was a dominant group that kind of moved in, took over, the people that were living in the nation so far, and I'm trying to get background context on this. And I was like, well, I live in a country where that happened. And so this was really before a lot of the reconciliation process really kind of hit in the high stream. Now you can find a lot of books on the subject. At the time, I couldn't find much of anything, right? I wanted to find something written from the First Nations perspective about what was going on, and I had to hunt for it. And I finally found a book, and it was about this back in the early 2000s. There's this series of protests, First Nation protests. They called it the Idle No More movement. And I remember I was like an adult at the time. I saw it on the news, and I was like, what's going on here? I don't know what this is about. But this book was about that particular protest, and just filled in. I probably learned more in that book than I had in my entire life about sort of the history of the country that I belong to with the First Nations groups, right? Just ripped my mind open. I was like, well, how did I make it so far in my life and know nothing about all of this kind of stuff here? It was, as I say, it's just like one book has the power to change a life, to change a mind. That was a book for me. It was called The Winter Danced, if anybody's ever interested in that book. The Winter We Danced. So there you go.
Awesome. Excellent. Thank you for sharing that with us. Paige,
So I
Juliet?
had that's kind of a regional factoid that I grew up in New England, and you don't know how something is pronounced if you just see it written, and the way culture changes words is fascinating to me. And we drove over the mountain into New Hampshire, going to the Lancaster Fair, and there's a street sign pointing north out of Gorham, New Hampshire to Berlin, New Hampshire. And I said, I was like a little kid. I said, I didn't know there was a Berlin in New Hampshire. I thought that was only in Germany, because what I'd learned about the word was that it was a city in Germany. And he said, no, it's Berlin. It's not Berlin. It's Berlin. And it was changed during the Second World War. They officially changed the pronunciation of that town because they didn't want to be associated with that the German city, even though that was in fact what it had been named after originally. And so the fact that there was a world war impacted this tiny little mill town in New Hampshire, and there was a resolution on the books about how that name is said. So when you start looking back at why things are pronounced the way they are, and how our language comes into being, and how events in history change those kind of things, that becomes really, really interesting. And I have a whole bunch of books on word lore and word origins, and because when I'm writing epic fantasy, I don't want to have my characters saying like, sure, that's great. That's not going to say that, So how are they going to say that? When were words invented? When were words reclassified? When did words' meanings change throughout history? If we're writing in English, awesome in 1950 does not mean what awesome means now after living through the 80s. So for me, it's those tiny tidbits of facts that are really interesting. The other one was the reason that Savannah was not burned during the Civil War is because they paid off Sherman's army not to burn the city. The city leaders paid off, which is why Savannah, Georgia is still an antebellum city, architecturally, because it wasn't burned down. Because they got bribed. The soldiers got bribed not to do it. So There's all kinds of weird things like that. Like, who was the person that thought to do that? And how did they negotiate it? And how did they get across the lines to offer up the money? And how much was it? And where did it come from? And so all of a sudden you're in Storyland, just because you've learned a weird fact.
Awesome. Excellent. Thank you so much. Juliet?
Yeah, I got nothing. Like nothing is like I haven't really come across the fact that was a surprise to me or changed kind of like what I had already believed.
Did you come across one that reinforced a belief you had that maybe you hadn't before?
Yeah, definitely. And I think because I usually start with nonfiction before fiction, so it inspires the idea. Like I kind of already know about it before I start it. So like I'm just reading and kind of going deeper into layers on what I'm writing.
Gotcha. Awesome. Excellent. I want to thank everybody for being here today and sharing your thoughts about your nonfiction in your fiction. It's a little bit more complex than peanut butter in your chocolate, so I appreciate everybody giving their thoughts on that. Let's go ahead and see what's coming up this week. This week, and go into now. Here we go. All right. Okay, so for this week, I know I said that a lot already. Hold on. Where are my notes? Okay. Monday, all times are Eastern time. So Eastern Standard Time, right? Yeah. So Monday at 7 p.m., 21 grams, as Joe Compton sits down with C.L. Cannon to talk about fantastical villainy. That should be a good one. At 8 p.m., Hit the Dice. Is our very first to be continued. It's true. To be continued. We did episode 1 of this one last week, and now we're doing part 2. Christopher Helton leads a band of unlikely heroes in his game Action Heroes, and we'll actually get to play. I'm playing the hero Rust. So hopefully you tune into that. Wednesday night, I'll be back at 8 p.m. SM Hillman brings Zero Means You're Dead live with his ghost, Rob Reed. We'll be interviewing Rob Reed, who's created the game Zombie Assault. Rob will be our first card game guest. We're excited about that. Saturday, premiering at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, we have Saving a Seat for You, the indie movies on Brian Tan and Joe Compton review 3 new indie film releases and 1 recommendation from indie author and musician and cinephile Shane Wilson. Tune into that. It should be good. Sunday at noon, next Sunday, This Week in Indies with Joe Compton he leads a roundtable discussion of specialized industry titans who know when you are being scammed and when you are being given a deal of a lifetime. Hear their advice and their red flags on betting other industry pros. It's going to be an excellent show 2 weeks in a row. I mean, they're always excellent. I knew that. But very informative, I think, for 2 weeks in a row. Okay, so Ben says, other New Englander here, there are multiple Berlins. Oh, sorry, I got it right. Berlins or Berlins. There's a Berlin, Maryland, too. Are multiple
They're everywhere.
And pronunciation varies among them, too. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
What a great show. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Vanessa, for being here and supporting us. We always appreciate it. And, I'm on next week's show, so Vanessa will be here next week. Fantastic. Okay, so now we will talk about March of the Writers, or we will talk about it. Let's let JD Estrada, who's usually here to break the fourth wall for us, let's JD talk about March of the Writers.
Greetings, fellow humans. Welcome to the March of the Writers, and we're going to be discussing the topics for the first week of March of the Writers. In English, we're going to be partnering with Go Indie Now, and in Spanish, we're going to be partnering with PEN Internacional de Puerto Rico, just so that we can reach more people and get more people motivated to create, connect, and do stuff that is nice while the world is insane. Anyways, Go Indie Now is a network dedicated to supporting creators, independent creators, artists, musicians, movies, books, etc. I've known Joe Compton for a long time. He's a brother from another mother. He's the godfather of Go Indie Now. And this year, we're officially partnering with go indie now. So without further ado, so that we can get into it and so that you know what it is, March of the Writers is really a yearly tradition where we take 31 prompts for the 31 days of March so that you can explore and have content. And if you're out of ideas, we give you ideas. So for day number 1, the topic is who is this is. Who are you? What have you done? Just give us an intro of who you are so that people can get to know you a little bit better. For day number 2, it's going to be generally speaking, and read how it's written. Some people love to explore a variety of genres. Other people like to focus on a genre. What do you do? Where do we explore? How do you write? Topic for day number 3 is cover stars. You've got books, you've got covers. I'm super proud of my books and my book covers and the artists that I've been able to collaborate with. This is your opportunity to pimp out your artist so that people can, if they're looking for a cover artist, they know that, your book that rocks and has an awesome cover, they want that artist. For day number 4, where you are and where you're going. Some people are so organized that it's insane, it's scary, it's intimidating. And a lot of people actually don't know where they are. So this is your time to be mindful of where you are, where you come from, and where you're going. For day number 5, your origin story. If Marvel can have an origin story for all their superheroes, we want to know your origin story. For day number 6, this is normally done a little bit later, but I'm bringing this forward earlier. Writing tribe. Who are your people? Who are some of your biggest advocates? Who are some of your biggest supporters that you want to share with other people so that people can connect? And for day number 7, tune in or tune out. Do you listen to music while reading? Do you listen to white noise, green noise, brown noise, any noise? There's a March of the Writers playlist. We're going to be sharing that. And this is your opportunity to share the tunes that you get your right on. Anyways, those are the topics for week 1. Feel free to follow Go Indie Now and follow me for more tips, tricks, and topics for March of the Writers. Cheers.
Awesome. So thanks, JD, for doing that. I'm assuming he's going to do that again for next week. So we'll be seeing you next week on next week's show. All right. It is now time for the epilogue. So our panelists are going to read an excerpt from their writing. As they do so, we will have a QR code up on the screen so you can connect right to that and pick that book up, I guess, in various forms. So who wants to go first?
I'll go first.
Okay, excellent. Let's get highlight.
Okay, so
Anita?
I am reading from Murder, Magic, and Maple Fudge. And the backstory in this particular book is loosely based on rum running from Nova Scotia, and this is one of the books I used, Oceans of Rum by David Mossman, who's a local writer here. And so this is because there's a backstory regarding some stuff that's going on in the town about 1920s rum runners who were also witches, and this is when they're first finding it out, this particular scene. Okay, so we scrambled to our feet and asked to use one of the library's computers. Soon we were deep into the history of East Haven Bay, specifically my bakery. Hey, my place used to be a bookstore and supposed smuggling base for rum runners. So the rumors could be true, and there might be a connection to the Johnson and McNeil families. Did the Johnsons own it back then too? No, it says the owner was an M. LeBlanc. Hannah gasped. When I stared at her, she squirmed and ducked her head. Uh-oh. She knows something and doesn't want to tell me. Hannah, I tried to be gentle, yet my annoyance slipped out. What do you know? She glanced at me. That this was probably a bad idea. If M. LeBlanc is who I think it is, then she could have created a concealment spell. She was definitely powerful enough to weave magic that would evade detection from other witches. And if she was involved, then there's a high chance prohibited magic is connected somewhere. Her expression changed to anxiety. We don't want to be messing with something where she's mixed into it. It could get us banned. Who are you talking about? Marie LeBlanc. She said it with a fearful reverence, as if it held a dreadful meaning. I was clueless. Never heard of her. Oh, Hannah blinked and pulled out of her funk. Yeah, you wouldn't know. Marie LeBlanc was a notorious witch who lived in East Haven Bay. Rumor had it she emigrated to Canada from New Orleans around 1910. She didn't practice ethical magic, and she was a criminal, a smuggler. She got herself banned from all the local covens and a reputation for selling potions, spells, and curses to anyone who would pay. She was accused of murder once, but all the witnesses either mysteriously died or refused to talk or disappeared. She and her grimoire are a local legend to some. Grimoire? My spine prickled. What happened to that? No one knows. It disappeared after she died, even if it even existed. Oh, it existed. No witch that powerful would be without a grimoire. In fact, it might be at the center of this whole mess. How? Ignoring the question I asked, when did this Marie LeBlanc die? 1925, I think, again, under mysterious circumstances. I don't know a lot about her, mostly the older witches telling stories and warning us away. Okay, that fits. Let me see. Some more checking on the computer, and I found what I was looking for. Here, a news article about an explosion on George Johnson's boat. The official cause? A faulty engine. George Johnson was seriously injured, and look, there was one fatality, Marie LeBlanc. So they knew each other. I bet they were in cahoots together, as they used to say, at least George and Marie. Certainly rum-running criminals. Then Angus McNeil either double-crossed his partners or tried to eliminate his competitors by sabotaging the boat to kill them. And only got one? Why sabotage, though? Money? Or maybe it was all about the grimoire. Huh? Think about it. What would be worth killing over? The secret grimoire of a powerful witch. An artifact like that would be sought after by collectors or other witches looking to enhance their abilities. I bet Marie and Johnson died for it, and whoever hired my landlord to snoop around the bakery is after this grimoire. Heck, maybe this mysterious map is the key. And that's the excerpt from Murder, Magic, and Maple Fudge.
Awesome. Excellent. Thank you so much. All right. And who wants to go next?
I could go.
Okay. Ben, let me go ahead and highlight you and get your Brother's Keeper up there.
Yeah. So this is an excerpt from chapter 4 of My Brother's Keeper. So it's from the perspective of Max, a private eye, who is investigating the death of his twin brother. We talk about the debts owed to the people we've wronged, even after death. You might think it's simple enough to stand at their grave and ask their forgiveness, but the Talmud prescribes that you take 10 people with you and say your sins against God and the person aloud. Which is weird enough, needing to roll 10 deep to apologize to someone, but you aren't speaking to them, you're addressing God, because our religion is about life and the living, not death and the departed. As I drove away from East Street, all I wanted to do was talk to Solomon. This wasn't an impossible task, except it was a slippery slope as far as doctrine was concerned. Jews held a dim view of divination. That might be an understatement, given the Torah was clear on divination being prohibited. Why? There were some boundaries we shouldn't cross. The afterlife was a complicated topic in Judaism. There were plenty of ways to get around the restriction, and some rabbis even practiced scripture-approved forms of divination. Dad always took a hard line against it, though, passed down from his father. He thought no one should know the future, what only God can see. I was crossing a line, betraying the family tradition. Even considering it felt trafe. But what choice did I have? Souls were real and lived on after the death of the body. Sheol was the Jewish version of Hades, the place where we went when we died. It was neither good nor bad, just a place. What happened to bad people when they died? Jews didn't have hell per se. If you believed in a purification of the soul, Gehenna, was where people who needed a spiritual timeout ended up before moving on to the Garden of Eden. Truly evil people stayed in Sheol forever. Only us regular jerks could atone and move up to Gan Eden. It got messy quickly, depending on who you talked to. So, Solomon could still be wandering the earth, but I'd like to think he'd have yelled in my ear by now. He might be enjoying his final rest in either Sheol or Gan Eden, or working off his spiritual bill in Gehenna. Was he a good man? I would have bet money he was, but he was a practicing mystic too. That made things complicated. And that is my excerpt from My Brother's Keeper.
Awesome. Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that. Paige, Brad?
I'm going to throw a plot twist on you guys, and you can hate me later, Joe. But I put the cover for Dragon Weather up there, but I've changed my mind. I'm actually not going to read from it. But because the piece I want to read, I think, shows an interesting way to use nonfiction. So if you want to get an idea of my writing style, this is how I write. You can experience it in the book that the QR code links to. But this is actually a short story that's in a charity anthology. Neither beginnings nor endings. It was the 2022 Jordan Con charity anthology. If you're going to Jordan Con, you can probably pick up a copy there, or it is available online. And the story is called The Mercy of the Lorn. And this is the one I was speaking of earlier that is about memory. And I think I might actually read it from my screen instead of from my book in my hand. All right. He pulled the toy ship to his chest and folded himself around it. If he sat here long enough, the golden leaves would fall, and longer still, and the new growth would bud, spreading bright and green above him. If life carrying forward, no matter how it grayed around the edges, mattered, then that would matter. Be Reitz, he said. Remember. Nestled among oaks, a house, small and neat in the sun, alone but not lonely. Sorry, I scrolled too far. But not lonely among rolling hills, a wide green river rolling into the sea, fish and fresh peppers, laughter and family, a high-kicking dance and the flash of silver swords. People walked the land still, tripped on broken stones and fallen walls. Did they wonder who had come before, who built on the place they stood, what mattered to them and why they had gone away? Tramp cried. Hot tears ran into his beard, dripped onto the ship in his hands. Be it not one memory lost when I die. Be it place and people all at once. Be that I long for. Be that only inside me now. What had been before the conquering, before the dust and dying, before the half-forgotten language was pushed from terrified throats and buried in the minds of the lucky and the strong, to be called up only on dark nights and in secret, remembered and shared on. Shared on despite the ruin of the place held dear in his mind, despite the knowledge that the boats that had once sailed the harbor were long sunk and rotted, despite tears and oppression and the scars of war. He remembered the run to the neighbor up the trail on the day his grandmother died, the vibrant colors of a fall day not unlike this one, the oval face of his mother softened by a smile as they sat in the sun, and she taught him to hold on and hold on and hold on for all the world, ritual and claiming, sharing and passing forward, what he knew and knew again, that was worth living for, even if he was the last, even if in the end he held on only as long as any could. What was lost? What remained? Ama, he whispered. She touched his hair. Reitz, she replied. Memory. And he fell forward into benevolence and into reverie.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Appreciate it very much, Paige. And Brad, ready to get you up, and let me get
you. Yep. So I'm reading. I'm going old school. I'm not reading from screen. I'm going to read from an actual book here. Ashme's Song. So the just the background that you need for this, our band of heroes have they're traveling across the country, and they enter a small village, a small town, and there's a protest going on, and there's this old villager sort of sitting by watching the protest, and they kind of walk up to the old guy and have this conversation with him. Other bits of context, the army is called the CPC, the Calum Peace Force, but it's actually the army. and the army has so it's a science fiction world. So the army has these machines, these floating robots called angels that are actually just sort of weapon systems for the army. So our heroes walk into this town. There's a protest going on. They're talking to this old man about what the deal is. All right. The old man nodded his head toward the scrum below. They do that every week. But the protesters? Hamilcar asked. Yep, I used to participate myself. Here, look at this. The old man hiked up one of his pant legs and put his slender calf on display like a butcher showing off a ham. A thumb-sized chunk of it was missing, and the skin had grown over in an ugly scar. Hamilcar grimaced. Nasty. Ha! Hurt like a son of a bitch, too. Got hit close range by a stun round. They're supposed to be non-lethal, but you get hit by one close up, it'll take a chunk out of you. He pulled down his pant leg. But as you say, I'm pretty damn old now, so I don't rough it up like I used to. They do this every week? Hamilcar asked, pointing to the valley below. Why? The reservoir is ours, the old man said, pointing at the body of water behind the fence the CPC defended. He swung his finger to point at the outpost on the far hill. When they built that about 40 years ago, they took the reservoir from us. We've got to ship our water in from Cardinger now. 40 years? About that. They don't share the water with you? Nope. Hamilcar stared at the reservoir behind the fence of plasma wire, hands on his hips. So they'd rather be attacked weekly for 40 years than share the water? Yep. And you have attacked every week for 40 years and accomplished nothing. The old man glared at Hamilcar. That's a dick way to say it, but I suppose so. And nobody thinks this is crazy. Everybody thinks this is crazy. Ashmi crossed her arms, hand in front of her mouth, and stared silently at the protest. A shamed foreigner was seeing how her people were forced to behave, yet hoping he too saw the Osterici's vileness. Black tear gas filled the valley. Dark shapes moved within, throwing rocks and bottles at the CPC lines. Even here on their promontory, nearly a kilometer away at the top of a hill, Ashmi's throat burned from the traces of tear gas in the air, and her eyes watered. Shen rocked back and forth as he squeezed his earlobe between his thumb and index finger. He was getting anxious. You have a wicked accent, he said to Hamilcar, his voice hoarse from the smoke. It sounds like you sing when you talk. The old man scoffed. Hamilcar just smiled. Shen, he said, you have a fantastic ear. Down below, a young kid, maybe 8 or 10 years old, tough to tell at this distance, emerged from the cloud of tear gas. His gas mask was too big for him. He was struggling to breathe. An adult ran out of the cloud, scooped the kid up, and ran away. Hamilcar gestured towards the fray. You bring children to riots? Should we teach them to live in fear of the Goldies? The old man said. Should we teach them to submit to our oppressors? And everyone thinks this is crazy. It is crazy. With a harrowed gaze, Hamilcar watched the adult set the child down. Other adults came with bottled water to help. It is crazy. Ashmi saw.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. All right. So, there we go. Okay. I want to thank everybody in the comments for being with us today and for viewing. And if you're later on, you view this on Memorex, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. We love interacting with our viewers. All right, so last few comments. Let's see. Okay, so we have someone else, author Richard White. Good day, friends. Mr. L, it's been a while. How's everyone? Hello, Richard. Great topic for the day. I'm interested in what everyone has to say. Using real historic events in my Ryan series. Excellent. Upstate New York, New Yorker. I know that's not the correct accent. Forgive me. Vanessa is, I'm looking forward to Ben's book. I am too, actually. I'm really excited for my brother's keeper. Hey, Richard. Thanks, Vanessa. Comes out 3:30. Pre-orders are up now.
I'm so sorry. There's so much fourth wall breaking from me.
That's okay. No problem. Vanessa acknowledges and asks about other platforms. Great readings. Loving it. Yep. I thought so too, Richard. I thought all the readings were fantastic. Ebook, no. Paperbook, hardcover. Yep. Vanessa will be in touch. Trying to limit physical books right now. Moving, and I don't buy ebooks from Amazon. Yep. And I'll reach out after release date. There we go. How are you, sir? Miss you. Oh, Captain, my captain. There we go. If you want in on the arc, let me know, and you can get one early. Arcs. How are you, SM? I'm good, Richard. Thank you so much. Ben, yeah, I would love that. Absolutely. Hi, Richard. Very cowboy you are. And at least I can hawk my caw. Yeah, there we go. Thank you all for participating in the comments. We really appreciate it. We all appreciate that. Okay, Brad, we are going to start with you. Tell folks where they can find you on the internet, and if you have anything coming out, or pimp your stuff.
You bet. All right. Probably the easiest thing to send you to is my website, bradanderson2000.com. I think I'm the 2000th one, apparently. bradanderson2000.com. You can get a link to all my books there. I'm going to be promoting a trilogy I wrote a little while ago. So that's going to be re-released in the next couple of months. It's called the Triumvirate Trilogy. But again, check out my website, bradanderson2000.com. You can find all my stuff there.
Perfect. Thanks, Brad. Thanks for being here and sharing with us today. Paige Human.
Yes, I am Paige Human, to those who know me well. Paige L. Christie, put the L in there. Otherwise, you'll find somebody who's not me. Probably my website is the best place to track me down, paigelchristie.net, not .com, because I had a GoDaddy hack, and it's a whole thing. So I'm .net. I've got 3 short stories coming out in anthologies this spring. One is in Non-Corporeal 4 from Inked Publishing that's coming right out. The other is in the charity anthology, Dance When They Want You to Cower, that supports specifically LGBTQ plus transgender specifically rights in this country in these horrible times. And another in the JordanCon anthology coming out at JordanCon in 2025. And the proceeds from that will go to the Mayo Clinic. So I've got 3 shiny new stories coming up. And if you're a fan of my Legacies of Arnon stories, the Dance When They Want You to Cower story is a story of Arnon, and it's only going to be published there. So if you want that, that's the only place you can get it. So you got to support that anthology. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here as always. Ben?
All right. So you can find me at benschenkman.com. My next release is coming out this month, March 30th. If you like doing advanced reader copies, in that you get a free ebook in exchange for an honest review on or near release day, go sign up on my website, because I would love to have as many reviews for this book as possible. It's something special to me, at least, but so far to other people. So yeah, benschenkman.com. All of my books, though, because I have another series and another series, are available. Ebooks are Amazon and Kindle Unlimited, paperback and hardcover, wherever it is that you like to buy those things. That's more wide. And I'm still working on the audiobooks for my first series. The first and second are out and widely available, not just on Audible.
Awesome. Perfect. Thank you so much, Ben, for being here and for sharing the things that you did. Appreciate it. And A.F. Stewart.
Hi. You can find all my fantasy, horror, cozy, paranormal, steampunk, whatever other genres I'm writing in at the moment, books over on my website, afstewart.ca. Hopefully the last Hayward and Anderson story will be out this year. I've only got the ending left to finish on that freaking story, so it's pretty much on track. So look for that later this year. And of course, Murder Magic and Maple Fudge is still available, as is Tales of the Norse Gods, Loki Saves the World, featuring the evil chicken. So that's me.
Awesome. Thank you for being here. Thanks for sharing with us. And thanks for reminding everybody about that evil chicken. Okay. Last few comments. A smile from Vanessa. A.F. Stewart, how are you, old pal?
I'm good.
Great show, everyone. Great moderating, Sean. That's me. I'm Sean. Y'all don't forget to like the show. Yes, like and subscribe. Hit the like button. Punch it. The like button like you're punching a Nazi. and I still got I still have to get the Evil Chicken book. Yes, I think I do too. I have to get the Evil Chicken book. All right. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for watching. Check out the March of the Writers. If you wanted to participate, like I did earlier today, go ahead and do that. I highly recommend it. It's a lot of fun. Because it's always time to go indie now. Have a great day, folks.